With us a panel of four very experienced and thoughtful legislators. I think that first off, I want to thank all of these guys for agreeing to be here with us, some of whom on somewhat very short notice. And so we really appreciate that. And so immediately to my left, we've got Senator Torrey Westrom, who represents a very large district here in western Minnesota that includes Elbow Lake and Morris and Breckenridge. To his left, we've got Representative Mike Nelson, our token Metro panelist today. Representative Nelson is a Democrat, represents a district in Brooklyn Park, first elected in 2002. When the Democrats were in the majority, Representative Nelson chaired the state government committee, the state and local government committee, and so we did a lot of work with him on land use and annexation. Very thoughtful guy to work with. To his left, Senator Eken, who you should be a familiar face to all of you, from the Valley, represents a district that includes Moorhead and Detroit Lakes. And then to his left, Representative Tim O'Driscoll, the former mayor of R-Sartell. So we've got a district in the St. Cloud area, first elected in 2010. Now, all of these guys have been in both majority and minority during their times in the legislature. And all of them have served some time in the Minnesota House. And so I think we've got a lot of good perspective here. And so maybe just starting with Senator Westrom, I sort of, I think one of the issues that kind of comes up most often is how can we avoid this last minute end of session rush? I mean, it seems like everything happens at the last minute, and are there ways that we can avoid that? Because it seems like it leads to mistakes and sloppiness. We've got a mic right there, yeah.
Well, is it on? Yes. It is. Oh, perfect. Well, that's kind of the $1,000,000 question, or maybe you could say the $40 billion question, same as our state budget. But I think there are processes that we should try to continue embracing. But I will also then offer you a little bit of a majority-minority perspective, because we've all served in both those roles, and I think that's sometimes the dilemma of making the changes. And some of it is just the practicality of life. I often refer to the legislature. When I first got there, when I was first elected, I was just out of college at the age of 23, and I thought this is strangely familiar to college classes and end of semester finals, and the legislature does operate that way. You've got your committee structure, and every one of us has 3, 4, 5 committees, and that kind of runs your schedule day in and day out. When you have time in your office, otherwise, when you have time to do other things, but your committees kind of are like your classes. And then, of course, the committee deadlines and then the session deadlines are really like the end of the semester deadlines. And I often ask people, when you went to college, when did most research papers get finished? And very few got finished by mid-semester. And most of them got done the last week, and sometimes the best ones that got done in the last 24 hours. That isn't always true. But I mean, it's a little of the same phenomenon, the human element. So that part I don't know exactly how to deal with, because I think that is legitimately part of the issue. It's just why do today what we can do tomorrow? Same thing people have done through college and everything else. One of the things I do think we should try to do is move up deadlines. Deadlines are set in the Constitution for the 3rd Monday of May that you have to adjourn, so that becomes the ultimate deadline. Although as long as you've got a special session escape, you can do that. But I think moving deadlines up would be helpful. But the pushback on that is just the nature of negotiations. And when you're in negotiations, sometimes it's kind of like playing chicken. And who can outlast the other party, or doesn't want their issue as bad as the other party, so they'll outweigh them, and then hopefully get the other side to give a little bit more, or fold, like a game of poker. And I mean, I'm trying to issue these analogies so you can understand. That is literally what is going on oftentimes, because there's parts of a bill that somebody really does want to keep. The bill, yet it might be the objectionable part that others don't want, and eventually as time becomes the crunch, that becomes what closes the deal, as well as lack of sleep and endurance and things like that. And so that is the part that I think is the catch-22, or the hard part, to say, yeah, we could just move deadlines up to April 1st, and then everything would be done, come in for a nice landing by May 15th, and everything would be done. But you've got the elements of negotiation and strategy, and that's the part that I think April 1st, you won't get the same deals as you'll get May 15th or May 20th. So, but I would say move up deadlines, and also maybe have some joint committees so things are processed together sooner.
As far as how we can make things end easier, a lot of what Torrey said, there's a lot of truth to that on both sides. You probably get up too far in advance, you end up trampling on the minority point of view. And when we have divided government, which we had for most of the time that I've been in the legislature, you have different points of view. Whether it's the Senate and the House having different takes on how to do something. And then they get into the conference committee, and it's them arguing back and forth there, and then you throw in a governor and either party that has their points of view. That's why things end up at the very end. And part of the crunch is so people can get their point of view done, and so that they can. There's a time element that we have to be out there by the first Monday after the third Saturday in May, which is normally around May 20th. And so it pushes it back to that, and puts pressure on everything else to get done. And you don't want to be on the committee that finishes first, and it's usually a negotiation, a global negotiation that we agree on all this stuff, and that's usually the leaders that do that. It's not even in the committees, it's the minority leader and the majority leader with the governor making those decisions and coming to a package, and then everything flows after that. But some of that is also just management of the person running either chamber, managing so that things get done on time. And we've had some cases where we've had really good management, we got things done well. We've had other cases where stuff hasn't been managed as well, and stuff ends up falling through the cracks.
So Senator Eken and Representative Driscoll, I'm going to kind of ask the same question, but in a slightly different way. Senator Westrom mentioned the committee deadlines, and so committee deadlines really do drive a lot of work at the legislature, and there's typically 3 of them. And the last one is for bills in either house to clear either the Ways and Means Committee in the House or the Finance Committee in the Senate, and then they go to the floor to be voted on, and then they go to the conference committee. Some people have suggested that maybe a solution to some of this might be a 4th deadline for conference committees to finish their work. That maybe might be a week or so out ahead of the end of session, ahead of that constitutional deadline. Is that something that would help take some of this human element that I think we all agree is there and is just part of what it is? Would that help things in some way, or is that a terrible idea?
No, I think that's a great idea. And is this working?
Yep.
And I do support that, and I think that we should put it out a week, in my view, at least 24 hours. Right now, there is no deadline at all for conference committees. So we, for instance, received the bonding bill 15 minutes before the deadline, and everything fell apart in the last few minutes. And I can tell you, it was the most frustrating experience I've ever had in the legislature, was to watch everything unravel in the last few minutes, and there wasn't enough time to fix it. So we need time. As rank and file members of the legislature, I think most of us should be in favor of that, because otherwise it's giving a lot of influence to the leadership, sometimes who will use the clock as a mechanism in the final negotiations to play the game of chicken that Senator Westrom talked about. We don't want to see such important issues being used in a game of chicken here, and that's what the clock is being used as. This deadline is being used in that type of game, and For instance, when the bonding bill came to us, it was take it or leave it. When there was an attempt made to change it, everything fell apart. There wasn't enough time, as I said, to fix it. So I think that that's important that we do that. It's more than just the human element then of waiting until the last minute. I think that's part of the problem. And it's not just waiting, it's not really procrastination so much as it is everyone wanting to get what they want and not wanting to give in on their principles. So it's a principle thing among many, and we're talking about a very large body here with 67 senators and 134 representatives. And so I think you need to have these benchmarks and these deadlines in order to push things along in a much more efficient way. And everybody knows that compromise is the key to getting things done. And I certainly understand that we can't get everything we want. And I got another thing that I'd point out, and I've been pushing also, I've been carrying the bill for redistricting, to put redistricting in the hands of a nonpartisan outside group of retired judges who would make those decisions. Because I do think that gerrymandering comes into play here when you have safe districts being created. I think it's good to have a lot of districts that are in play. I think that helps to foster an environment of compromise as well. So, that, I know you mentioned earlier, Bradley, about I don't think it's good that we become dissected into one party dominating one area, one party dominating another. I think it's good to have a mix, and that helps to facilitate compromise too. So otherwise, sides tend to dig in. I also would caution any legislators or candidates for the legislature from signing pledges, which I think makes it impossible to negotiate a compromise deal in the end if you're locked in to some ironclad oath or pledge that you've taken. That's not a good thing. And I've been asked to sign pledges for things that I believe in, but I've said no, because if I do that, I feel like I'm locked in and I have no ability to negotiate a compromise deal in the end. And while it might not be everything you want in the end, sometimes you have to settle for a little less than what you originally wanted in order to get a deal that's good for the whole state. So those are some of the things that I would push for. The influence of outside groups, I have concerns about the outside money that comes into play as well, because these outside groups expect something in return. And they're usually looking at one issue or just a handful of issues, and they're not looking at the big picture. So I think there's a need for campaign finance reform. Unfortunately, given the Citizens United Supreme Court decision, not much can take place unless that decision is overturned.
In January, I'll be starting my fourth term, 7th year in the legislature. The year I came in January of 2011, we were facing a budget deficit, and we were spending right around $36 billion, give or take. So now we're spending close to $43 billion. We want to look at about $78 billion more that are being spent in that 4-year period of time. Why do I raise that as an issue? Because the legislature meets from January through May, and we've got to decide how we're going to appropriate all of those funds to all the various needs that are in the state of Minnesota. So in essence, the state is spending more money, but still having the same period of time to go through, to look at, to talk to all the different interest groups, both in the House and the Senate. Unlike the cities, and harking back to my days as mayor, we had the whole year to be able to work on these things. The same case could actually be made about the legislature at the local level. Why do city councils wait till the last meeting in December to pass their budgets? Why are you waiting till the very last minute to pass police and fire and public safety and parks? You do it all in one omnibus bill or one omnibus piece of legislation. Your bonding bill, if you will, is your transportation, your road infrastructure that you usually do in the first part of the year that you'll start putting out for bid and you start doing work on roads at that point. So there are some similarities but yet differences, and the legislature is locked into constitutionally that 5-month period of time in order to be able to conduct business. Second fold on that, think of the House and the Senate as being two different cities. If you've ever negotiated joint powers agreements with other communities or with other local governments, they have their needs and wants, you have your needs and wants, and sometimes those take a period of time to be able to get resolved. Think of that as the House and the Senate, the structure that we operate under. Certainly we can work more toward deadlines and more toward cooperation, which I will hand to Speaker Dowd and to Leader Bach, both being from different parties, have always found a way to be able to work together on things. And this past session, which has gone unsaid and underreported, is we actually did have very good bipartisan support between the House and the Senate on moving bills forward. Many of the major bills had near unanimous support or upwards of 75 to 80% support. To pass a bonding bill out of the Minnesota House, you have to have at least 81 votes, and we go well north of that, close to 90 votes coming off the House floor to be able to bring that over to the Senate. And it's my firm belief that the Speaker would not have put that bill on the House floor had he not had an agreement with Leader Bach on that bill, as he did with all of the other bills that were out there. I carried the pensions bill this year along with Senator Pappas from the Senate, and we have only 4 dissenting votes out of the entire legislature on that, but yet the governor did like some provisions that were in there and vetoed the bill. The tax bill had almost 90% support on it. So things do get done, but sometimes they don't get reported in the broader media to be able to learn more of what's happening. That's one of the things that I would ask you to ask the different associations that you're involved with it. What's the page 2 story on this? How much bipartisan cooperation was there on these kinds of activities? It's really easy to read the headlines in the first part on page 1 that says, legislature didn't get this done, or the legislature didn't do this. There's always reasons and rationales behind that. And again, I maintain that we've had a very good bipartisan legislative session. The tax bill, one of the things that's been very important in local government aid back to the 2002 levels, we weren't quite there, but we were able to do a good movement again toward that direction in the tax bill. Secondly, we were also able to provide additional funding for things that don't come directly through local government aid for communities across the state of Minnesota to apply for various grants and things as well. So it is getting done, but it's the old cliche, no one wants to watch sausage get made, and that's because of the same thing with legislation.
But I think, to your point, Representative Driscoll, one of the frustrations that I think a lot of folks have is you did do, clearly, I think there was a good tax bill that we supported a lot of the provisions of. There was a good bonding bill that we supported a lot of the provisions of. And even despite that, neither made it to the point where they could be signed into law. And so I think the question is, and for different reasons, the bonding bill certainly was a much more ideological issue between the two bodies. But the tax bill, one of the things that we just talked about was this a conference committee deadline. The conference committee finalized the tax bill on the last Saturday of session at about 10:30 in the evening. And they did it, the conference committee themselves, without having an actual copy of the bill in front of them. They had a spreadsheet that sort of had their intent, and they voted on that. And then they adjourned, and they waited for the printers to print it so they could all sign it. And I think what threw a lot of us for a loop, and I think where there is an issue of process, is there was mistakes in it, mistakes that led to it, the necessity of the governor exercising a pocket veto. And so I wonder if we had some processes in place, those sorts of things could be avoided. I think that's one of the issues. One of the things, though, I want to raise, I want to get to, because you talked about the time that the legislature spends versus now how much state government has grown. I'm going to throw out an idea that I'm sure nobody in this room is going to agree with. Do we need to change the Constitution to give more time? Anybody? Anybody want to take me up on that?
I don't know what that's going to help. I know there are other states, a few of them that have full-time legislatures, and they also come down to not getting things done on time and not getting things done. Again, this goes back to some of it is the difference of opinion between the two parties. Also, like as we've seen the last few years, our caucuses are being more dominated at the nomination level, at the level where we first start running, by some of our more extreme elements on both sides. Being the right-wing side of the Republican Party, the left-wing side of the Democratic Party, and so we're sending candidates to be elected that are more extreme and or aren't willing to compromise. We used to have a lot of people in the middle, and I consider myself kind of there, and sometimes I get attacked from the left of my own party that sometimes they said, if we send these people there and you don't have the ability to compromise because you go in there, I'm not going to change, I'm not going to compromise, that's a four-letter word, and you fight like hell to keep your point of view there, and it's hard at the end, when you got to get a bill passed, that both sides are doing that to actually come to an agreement. So again, that makes it more difficult. I don't think us being a full-time legislature or having more time changing the Constitution, number one, I don't think it'd get through the legislature level, get through the people out in the borders of the state of Minnesota. But I don't think it's going to change the dynamics. I think some of the dynamics, we see this nationwide in a very divided country. We just had a presidential election which was very close, and people are just so diversely opposed to each other, and they don't want to talk to the other side and get their point of view and say, how do you see this, and actually think about it.
Senator Eken, looks like you want to.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I would agree that I don't think it's an issue of time, it's the issue of compromise, and willingness to compromise. I think it matters what the deadline is, if there is a deadline or not. It's a matter of whether people are willing to compromise. And it is getting more difficult, I think, partly because of the polarization you just referred to, Mike, in society generally. Especially if you have safe districts, like I said before, where there's really no incentive to compromise.
You've got a safe district, and if that district will somehow punish you for compromising, we want districts that are going to facilitate that environment that's conducive to compromise. And so I was going to mention one other thing, but I was talking about campaign finance reform as well. I thought it was important to mention that we do have a program in Minnesota where, we don't have the ability to rein in the big money from the outside because of Citizens United. We can counter it with clean money that candidates can have access to and raise, and we have a political contribution refund program which has been very good at enabling candidates to raise the funds they need from the people they seek to represent, so that they're not being beholden to outside groups as much as they may be in other states where they don't have such a program. That program wasn't funded this last time around, but I think we should fund that. I think that we should expand on that, and I think that that would help also facilitate that environment of compromise that's necessary if candidates are freed from the influence, or freed up to a certain degree from the influence of these outside groups.
So I'd be curious, so I'd be curious to hear, maybe starting with Senator Westrom. The microphone's right to your left there. Both the Democrats on the panel have actually raised this issue that if we had different campaign laws and campaign finance laws, that it might translate into better governing. What's your perspective on that? And then I want to hear what Senator Driscoll has to say about that.
Well, it's always something to point to, and I understand what Senator Eken is saying. If the state is giving you $50 of your donation back, somebody originally had to give it to you. Many of you are probably familiar with the former political contribution refund program that didn't get funded the last 2 years. But for about 20 years prior, we basically had it in place, and I don't know that it necessarily made a huge difference in compromising the legislature or not. It does seem like it comes and goes, and it goes more extreme and less extreme. I got to say, Senator Bach and Speaker Dowd seemed like they could compromise getting together. This last year, I know even Senator Bach in his own caucus had his own problems because the Metro senators in the DFL caucus didn't like him negotiating with Speaker Dowd, and it seemed like rural legislators, rural and Democrat or Republican, were more willing and thought the compromise that Senator Bach and Dowd came. So some of it comes down to a geographic difference, and so it kind of comes back to my earlier comment. The human element is at some point something we won't be able to take out of the process. And I guess to your earlier question, Brandon, do we need more time? Well, there are times we are really under a crunch. I think it is a little like college college research papers, you will use as much time as you have within reason. Now, you know, paper due in a week is one thing, but when you've got the whole semester to do it, we've got 4 or 5 months to do it. We can usually manage the time, but you need the pressure of a deadline. In my private life, one of the things I do is mediation as a third-party neutral, and it's the same thing as you get there. If there's no pressure on both sides to negotiate, both sides can kind of stand off and have their expectations be outrageous or not based in reality, and so I mean that's the benefit of a deadline. Moving them up, having more time with conference committee reports, that's all things that I think would be helpful to the process. But there again, if you run out of time, then you will often find groups that have the stuff in that bill also interested in changing those rules rather than waiting till the next year, because they'd rather have that last day deal than be barred by a 1 week prior to session deadline. And so, I mean, that's, again, the human element, and that's what we end up facing. And but I think for good governance, it is best to have those deadlines, because our staff, they are very valuable, as you know, in your local governments and any business you're associated with. It gets to be very tough. It's kind of like a farmer's harvest around the clock, the last week of session and the last days. And our staff has to have just practical, functional time to get things printed out and edits made. But lastly, I just want to address kind of this mistakes in the tax bill. And there are bills passed in March in the middle of session that have mistakes in them. It isn't necessarily an epidemic of the end of session. Those bills go through the revisor's office, and the process they've explained to me is they actually read them out loud to a third party, because that's how you catch more mistakes than when you read it yourself. But an and versus an or, which was a mistake in the tax bill this year, that and many other things get fixed in what they call a revisor's bill, and that's usually a ½ inch to an inch thick. Every year we pass at least one revisor's bill fixing those mistakes that happen sometimes at the end of session, but they happen in March and April and February and other times when bills pass too. So I just want to share that with you, because sure, mistakes can happen last minute, but there's a process we've had in place for forever just about to fix those mistakes as well.
Representative Driscoll, you know, when the most common answer when I think legislators or people around the Capitol are asked, you know, well, how can we end the gridlock? How can we make people compromise and get together? The most common answer tends to be, well, if legislators just had more opportunity to socialize with each other and to intermix and sit with each other at dinner. I've always been a little bit skeptical of that answer, but I'd actually be curious about everybody's perspective on that. But I mean, what is that an answer, or is there a different answer to the how do we sort of come together and compromise question at a, you know, because so much of this, as you all have pointed out, is so driven by the human dynamic. How do we soften the rough edges of that?
Brad, if you don't mind, before I answer that, I just want to make 2 comments on some of the stuff that we were talking about here. Most of the compromise we're talking about in the deadlines is all on fiscal issues. There are a number of policy-related issues that need to be looked at as well. And during my time as mayor, our city administrator, we gave her a lot of latitude to be able to work with the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities to help on changes in orderly annexation and annexation issues with the township. Those were charges that the legislature gave to the different groups to come together and work together. One of the reasons why things don't get done is those groups don't bring satisfactory legislation either to the benefit of the legislature to be able to act upon those things.
I've talked to some of the old timers that have been there or were there, and you know, I don't know if it's a little like a fish story or if they're true, but I mean, they talk about just about every floor in the state office building at 5, 6 o'clock would have different hors d'oeuvres or different things beverages and whatnot rolled in by different groups because they could do it, and it was a way to socialize and have people come out. And, you know, part of the time I like to just go home and debrief back at the apartment and get away from some of that noise, but I do think there is benefit in getting together. In the Senate, both the House and the Senate, there's a retiring room, but the Senate, my experience has been that the senators use that retiring room more for a place for coffee, a place to eat lunch, and do some of those things during session, but outside of session, more and more. And, you know, there's just good conversations that you can have, Republicans with Democrats. I've had great conversations. You know, that's a setting where Senator Eken and I didn't know he flew over the Rocky Mountains and done some incredible lands up in the mountains. And, you know, I mean, things like that him and I visited about, just having a cup of coffee during session in the retiring room or post-session. And so I think there could be a better way to socialize. I don't think, like Mike said, I don't think it's the full answer, but I do think it's soft with the edges because it's like anything. In sports, many of you used to play sports. I did growing up. You know, you always kind of think of that other town as a bunch of losers or a bunch of people that, you know, somehow you've conceived as a different person. But you know, in the end, when you've won or lost, you shake hands and you get to know them, and it kind of takes down those edges and that elusive feeling you have. And so I think, Brandon, to your question, if there'd be a way to do it without going back to the way Marty's laws, it was before Marty's laws, I think then it gets to the point where it's, if the purpose is to try to influence decision makers, I think it's gone too far. If the purpose is to just accommodate people getting together, socializing and getting to know more about that other human being and person and where they come from and their interests and why they have those interests, then I think it's good.
I'd like to, if you guys are all right, throw it open to some questions either about, you know, this topic, the process of the legislature itself, or, you know, maybe what session might hold, if you guys are willing to take a few questions.
Sure.
Are there any questions?
Yeah,
John and then Mayor Kunz.
Off and on the topic, what about the legislative pay amendment? What did you think about that?
Yeah, let's have Ken go first.
I was the author of that, and I think one of the things we needed to do was to get politics out of the pay issue and to pay out of politics, and to have a bipartisan, objective and independent group of citizens who have no connection to the legislature, no connection to state government that are making these decisions, because it is a clear, glaring conflict of interest for us to be setting our own pay. And it's very divisive. There's actually, you know, there's really two different factors here as far as conflict of interest. There's two different kinds of conflict of interest. One is the desire to, the financial conflict of interest, which may lead to members wanting to push the pay higher than it should. And then there's the political conflict of interest that may lead certain members to want to push it lower than it should be in order to get the political benefit from it in a campaign. And what we need to do is have a group that's looking for the right balance. You don't want people going into politics for the money. It is public service after all. And I don't think anybody here is going into it for the money, and we shouldn't. But no one should be deciding not to go into politics or to leave politics because of the money either. So there's a balance there to be reached, but we're not the ones that should be doing it because we're not objective. We are we either have a political benefit or a financial benefit, so we are not the ones that should be making that decision. And I mentioned that constitutional amendment, we went to the nth degree to make sure that there would be no conflict of interest whatsoever. That any and all conflicts of interest would be removed from the process. There will be no legislators serving on it, no legislative appointees, no former legislators, no spouses of legislators, no staff from the legislature, no lobbyists or former lobbyists in the legislature. Actually, we went beyond that. No judges or former judges, or the staff of judges, no. But there will be no state elected officials, state officer, or former state elected officials or any staff of state elected officials. So we've gone to the nth degree to make sure this is a truly independent, objective group of citizens that will be making that decision, and they'll read the issue right now.
That'll be a tough vetting process.
Other thoughts on legislative, yeah?
In the past, Kent and I have, in the past, have disagreed on it. I finally came around to it because we were losing people in the legislature, good legislators, in both parties. That the reason they had to leave is they needed to feed their families. And I know I took a cut in pay when I came in the legislature, and I made a lot more money doing what I was doing before I became a legislator. And so it's when you have to have that dynamic there, that leads to people doing things that they shouldn't be doing and possibly doing stuff illegal so that they can afford to feed their families. And so I came around to agree with Kent on it. In the past, I felt that we should have the guts of our conviction. If we think that the pay is not enough, then we should stand up and vote for it. But then we get beat up politically. I mean, it's one of the items that gets thrown at the legislature. If you saw the ads for the 3rd Congressional District, that was one of the things that they threw at Senator Bonoff, that she voted to raise her own pay by 38%. But it never went into effect. So she voted to do that, but it never went into effect because it never got passed. So I mean, it then becomes a political issue. So it takes some courage to do that. But like I said, I come around to agree with Kent that if we're going to have people in the legislature that can afford to be there and do the job for all of us and do a good job, they need to be compensated enough so their families aren't starving.
Yep, I voted no on it when I came up with the constitutional amendment. I voted no on the ballot box and encouraged everybody that I came in contact with to vote no on it. Here's why. The legislature creates political subdivisions in the state of Minnesota, counties, cities, and school boards. No one is setting your pay. You have to stand to the voters when you make adjustments in compensation for your commissions and for your elected offices. And so should the legislature have to stand with the people for that. Secondly, the structure as representative, that's how you got to know Ken. And then something terrible happens, like you want to cross the hall. But the chief people who will be picking the participants on this will be the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court and the governor. And on the House side of this, Jason Metza was the House author, and I asked him on the House floor, I said, Representative Metza, has there ever been a case in the state of Minnesota where the governor has appointed the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court? And his boss said, I don't know. If that's the case, I said, well, let me help you with that. Chief Justice Gilday, who is our current Chief Justice, was appointed by Governor Tim Blaney. And you don't think there could be some politics that could be done on that with the legislature if there is ever an opening before the Chief Justice has to stand election? Yeah, there are still some weaknesses in here. It should be left to the legislature to decide. And if we can trust you as a legislature to make those decisions and talk to your constituents, why can't we as a legislature do that as well? I will wholeheartedly agree with Representative Nelson's point that we're losing a lot of good people in the legislature on both sides of the aisle and both chambers because they can't afford to be away from working to feed their family with the ever-rising costs. And we haven't got a chance to talk about health insurance today, some of the impact that's having on folks here as well.
Senator Westrom, do you want to?
Well, I'm interested in your perspective in bringing it up briefly, but I'll just offer you my 2 cents. I did vote no on the amendment, and I voted no in the ballot box, just because I thought it is a tense issue. But there is some accountability to also justifying the pay raise. My thought was the language was worded a little bit too leading. And most people I talked to didn't know, they just gave us likely a pay raise. And 70% of the public voted for it, but I think most are surprised. They thought they were sticking it to the politicians by taking this power away, but I think if you watched or read any of my NPR comments on this around the day of the election, I think most people that voted for it maybe realize they voted for it for the wrong reason. But I'd just be interested in your perspective. But It is a tension issue. I mean, as you know, locally, you've got the same problem.
It was an off-ballot issue, and the point, exactly the point that you made, I had a discussion with my city administrator and our new council member who used to be our mayor, and, you know, was it appropriate constitutionally to do it? I had talked to the editor of our newspaper and said, well, maybe you should write an editorial about what's happening and what pay is. So that's why I brought up the question.
Yeah.
And we just voted to raise our city council pay by $1,000 a year, which kicks in on January 1st. So we just voted on council to raise our pay.
One thing in the mayor, please.
You're just mentioning whether it was right to do it by constitutional amendment. It had to be done that way because the Constitution is the one that gives us the authority over our own pay. So the only way it can be addressed is through the Constitution. I thought I mentioned too on the accountability issue. I also don't think that other elected officials should be setting their own pay. So I think we should be doing something similar with other elected officials. And as far as accountability, that's the only argument that I've heard raised as a reason keeping it in legislative hands, hold legislators accountable for the pay that they set for themselves. The fact is that argument really breaks down. It's weak at best, it's bogus at worst, because there are many legislators who vote on the pay issue who aren't coming back again, so they're not being held accountable. There are many who are coming into office who will come in right after the pay increase takes effect, and they're not being held accountable. And where it really is a bogus argument is where you have many legislators who vote against the pay increase, and then they take it after they voted against it, and they use the vote against the pay increase to cover up the fact that they're taking the pay increase. That's the exact opposite of accountability. So the accountability argument really is weak at best and is bogus at worst. When it comes to the pay issue, it isn't accountability, it's objectivity. And we are not objective. So that's the reason that I felt it needed to be removed. And I worked on a number of conflict of interest issues. I've also mentioned, as far as redistricting, I also don't think we should be drawing our own district lines. I don't think we should be choosing our constituents. Our constituents should be choosing us. So I also have an independent panel of judges, retired judges, who would make those decisions that I think would be completely independent from the process. I also carried legislation that would require that spouses have to reveal their financial holdings, and the members would have to recuse themselves from voting on bills that would have an effect on their spouse's financial holdings. So again, with accountability, we shouldn't be held accountable for how well we pay ourselves. We should be held accountable for how well we represent our constituents. That should be the issue. And I did see it in this election. There was a lot of diversion away from the real issues onto the legislative pay issue. And I don't think that's what we should be arguing about. We should be debating and discussing what's best for our constituents, not what our pay should be.
Mayor, please.
And thank you for all that you do. You accomplish a lot here for the state of Minnesota. But as public perspective goes, as you get down to the end of the session, you have some issues that can't be resolved. So you have about a half dozen people go into closed session to resolve those issues. What input do you have in that process?
Well, I'll try to be brief here. I mean, each caucus, first of all, that you have your caucus leaders that are generally going in, or chairs of the committees. So, members of the committee often have a fair amount of influence with the chair to say, these are important issues. In each caucus, you talk. Most of the issues are brought to caucuses to talk about what's being discussed, and you can't have 201 legislators all in the same room making an agreement. It doesn't. It's kind of like the head of a family. You can't decide where you're going to go if it's Dairy Queen, McDonald's, or Pizza Hut, and finally dad or mom have to decide. And yet they might consult the rest of the people part of the group. And so that's in your caucuses is where you have a lot of updates as well as feedback to your leaders. And that's very important. The caucuses are very important at that point, and the chairs of the committees that we all have their ears to a greater degree or not if you sit on that committee.
Other thoughts on that?
Well, it's just that when you're talking conference committees, you're talking about Senate and the House that passed a bill, a similar bill, but there are differences, and those conference committees is where they work out those differences between the Senate and the House. Once that conference committee agrees, it does go back to the separate bodies to pass or vote it down. And normally, they come to an agreement at that point, okay, these are the things we've changed. We're going to take the Senate language here because we think it's better. We're going to take the House language here. Budget bills, it's the dollar amount that it's set at in different parts of Senate. So that's where the agreement comes. And again, as Torrey said, you can't have 201 legislators in a room sit beside that because then it would be even worse than what it is now. Nothing would be done. So you got to have some people making those agreements back and forth.
I was just saying, in our caucus, we regularly discuss the issues, and then, as the session goes on, everybody's kind of got their ideas, and it kind of just comes to a point where we then say, here are the things that we would like to have accomplished, and send our leadership in, and then they come back and they update us on it. So, we're not sitting at the table, we certainly have our voice through what we said as a caucus is important, and charge our leaders to go in and fight for those kinds of things that we believe are important.
Certainly they need our votes in the end, so I mean, obviously they have influence in the process, but I think that having an earlier deadline for conference committees would give other members outside of leadership more influence in the process too. I think when you leave it to the last minute, that does give the leadership more influence than what I think they should have.
Other questions? Yeah, Steve.
Because I'd like to know a little bit about reinsurance, because the legislature going to spend $300 million to buy down premiums for 1 year, or what are you going to do with that?
Who wants to start?
We were dealt kind of an interesting set of dynamics after the insurer information was released, and that is in the way of a change in leadership in Washington, and the desire to improve, repeal, whatever you want to call it, the Affordable Care Act, or as the governor refers to it as the now Unaffordable Care Act. So 80% of the decision-making that happens at the state level comes through federal requirements, and so the states have their hands pretty well tied on this. And just a little bit of background, and I'm not going to be partisan at all, as I don't think any of us have after we talked about our principles and our points. But what ended up happening was, with the individual market and through the insurer, that pool of people are all going to be rated as the same type of risk, where if you have policies that you carry with your employees in the cities or larger groups, you can spread that risk over a larger, healthier group of people. The demographics have shown that inside the insured system, people who are receiving benefits are usually those who are not standard rated or can't find insurance from another vehicle or mechanism. Many of the insurance companies are planning on pulling out of the individual market. Blue Cross was before going up and over the hill that said they want out. This time, preferred one was before. We've got some logistic issues in the state of Minnesota. Number one, we only allow not-for-profit insurance companies in the health insurance market. And if you get into the managed market, you can have some things for Medicare supplements that can come from those. The second thing is the $300-some million we're talking about is not a permanent fix. It's a one-year buy-down of premiums, and it doesn't fix the problem. What we need to do in the state of Minnesota is look at putting a reinsurance program back in place. And unfortunately, we actually have fewer Minnesotans with affordable coverage now than we did before the Affordable Care Act. So we had a program called MCHUP, the Minnesota Comprehensive Health Insurance Act, that created the administration. As if you were rejected by a carrier, you brought your rejection letter to the MCHUP folks, and they then found you a carrier. Your premiums might have been higher, but there was a tax that was built inside the premiums that reflected to help offset and cushion that if that was a higher risk that the insurance company was taking on. Then First Lady Hillary Clinton was, President Bill Clinton's administration was here in Minnesota learning about what we did in Minnesota, and she probably spent like 8 out of the first 12, 14 weeks that she was First Lady back and forth in Minnesota to find what we were doing. At the end of the game, we are higher premiums, people who can't afford, and unfortunately, you have to make a decision. Do I break the law and not have insurance and pay a penalty, or do I pretty much not pay anything else or buy anything else and try to keep the insurance premiums? Folks, those deductibles that these people are looking at are $13,000, $14,000, $15,000 annual deductibles with premiums that are upwards of $30,000 to $40,000. That's what I've heard annual premiums for people in my district who aren't getting insurance. So the answer is you kind of got to wait to see what Washington does, because they have so many what many more tools they pull on this to allow us. One thing Minnesota should do and ask is our our senators, Klobuchar and Franken, to work with us to get a waiver from the Affordable Care Act, which would put a lot more flexibility back in other states and other groups that's successful in that. So maybe a short answer to a long answer to a short question.
Well, but I think, so one of the dynamics that I think we're looking at, is obviously as you all well know, an item like local government aid is our highest priority. And what happens with the general fund and any surplus that there may or may not be could be greatly impacted by this question of, are we going to do something in the short term here to bridge to a different solution, whether it's whatever the federal government ends up doing with the new administration or what we might be able to do with the state. So I think maybe the really sort of short focused question is, do you guys anticipate that we're going to be spending $100 million or more in the next year on some sort of bridge fix? Yeah. Okay.
Well, I think we will, and I think we should. This is a crisis, and it is a national crisis, but there's things that we can do at the state level to mitigate the damage and the suffering and caused by this crisis. And there's a lot of people, I mean, I know it's 5% of the population in the individual market statewide, but it's even more in the greater Minnesota communities where we have more self-employed people, more farmers. So our area is being impacted the most. And we're talking about people whose budgets are being, I mean, it's devastating to people's budgets. And so I do think we need to have a bridge. We need to deal with the long-term issues, though. We need to bring back MSHA, I believe. And that's one of the reasons that Minnesota's been impacted greater is because we have a high percentage of people that are experiencing serious health issues and have pre-existing conditions that are in that individual market, because MSHA was ended when the Affordable Care Act went into place. They were all put into insurance. And our pool is smaller as a percent of the population. So that's one of the reasons that we're experiencing that. But MSHA is not the reason for the problems that we're having. MSHA is just the exchange where you get your insurance. They don't set the premiums. I'd likened it to, blaming MSHA for the price of the premiums would be, a lot like blaming your refrigerator for the cost of food. The refrigerator doesn't set the cost of food, and MSHA doesn't set the cost of insurance premiums.
And that's a good point, because we're forgetting in the discussion, it's been a political discussion, it's been used by one party against the other party, and it helped in the elections, partly why the House and Senate flipped over. The insurance companies were the ones setting the rates. When the first year we had MSHA, we had some of the lowest rates in the country. And part of that was, I like it, in fact, 25 years ago, I sat on a committee for my employer, as a public employer, and we would pay insurance in the late 90s were going up 19% every year. And they couldn't afford that, so they put out, this public employer put out an RFP to get insurance rates, who could do the insurance. Well, the insurance company, these RFPs that we had come in, one of them was the insurance company we currently have. And they came into the committee, and we were all aghast when they said this. It's like, we looked at you, do we actually just hear this? They said, you can't switch from us. We did this, underbid this 3 years ago, and we lost money. And that's why we're having to raise the rates. And because we got to make our money back. And you can't quit us now because we haven't made our money back yet. And that was part of the presentation. So they underbid it, lost, knowing they're going to lose money, thinking they're going to get in the end. I think what happened with the insurance companies, and I was listening to a national person saying this, that one of the mistakes that they made is that they undercosted what it was going to cost. A sicker pool got into it because one of the things that the government office, GAO and the federal government thought when they priced this out was that some small employers would drop their insurance, give the money they're paying on insurance to their employees, and let them go into the healthcare funds and buy it through the funds, through the insurance, MSHA in Minnesota's case, through the exchanges. And there was so much question marks at the beginning of what was going to happen that didn't happen. So there was a whole pool of healthier people that would have got into the market, that would have mitigated some of the costs or spread those out. So again, they ended up with a sicker group, a group that needed more help, cost more, and the insurance companies made mistakes and they didn't cost it right. And right now they're doing what businesses have to do, is they're trying to raise the rates so they can at least break even on this, if not make a little bit of profit, because that's what businesses do. And we're blaming the insured, as Ken said, I've heard another one, it's sort of like blaming your toaster for your being fat. It's not, the insurer isn't the one that set the rates, the insurance company set the rates. The Commerce Department had to approve those rates, but the insurance companies are the ones that set those rates. And we're blaming insurer, we're blaming the Affordable Care Act for this, and some of it's, like I said, the insurance companies screwed up, that they underbid it and undercosted it, and now they're trying to make their money back, and that's why the rates are going up so fast.
Are you familiar with what rates are? I mean, I'm a participant, so my wife and I, I'm 61, she's 58, $1,100 a month, $13,000 deductible, so $6,500 a piece. About 12 years ago, Blue Cross Blue Shield, with the kids and us on there, I was writing a check for almost $1,500 a month for an 80-20 policy, $2,500 deductible. That was when it was going to go up about 15% the next year. That's when we went into the health insurance pool. She had a pre-existing condition. So she had her own policy with a $10,000 deductible, and the boys and I had a policy with a $10,000 deductible. So I don't think the Affordable Care Act has really hurt or changed the cost from my perspective, and I've been buying insurance for 25 years on the private market.
And my brother, who works for a large insurance company, just happens to be, they don't do health insurance. And he just got it, and he gave me a copy of it. What his employer pays for his insurance, when you add up what his employer pays for his insurance, and he's on a policy, him and his wife, they have no kids, so it's they have single coverage, single plus one, and family coverage. And his single plus one, when you figure out what his employer pays and what he pays, it's costing them 20 grand a year what his insurance is sold. When, like I said, a lot of people that get it through their employer don't understand what they're making. I come out of the building trades. Last time I got my insurance through the union, it was, we were putting in $10, $11 an hour. So if I were 2,000 hours a year, multiply that at $10 an hour, and that's what I was paying for my insurance. And that was family insurance.
And people just don't understand what that dollar amount is.
Yeah.